I'm Ian MacArthur, and this is Good Employment Chatter, the podcast of the Greater Manchester Good Employment Charter. In this series, we'll give you an inside view to the lives of key figures across Greater Manchester, their stories, employment journeys, and their perspective on why good employment really matters. Today I'm delighted to be joined by none other than the Mayor of Greater Manchester, Andy Burnham. Elected as Mayor in 2017, Andy's manifesto made the commitment to develop a good employment charter. So without you, Andy, the charter would not exist and we wouldn't be here today. Many thanks for finding time to join us.
You're welcome, Ian. No, it's great to be with you, and it's really a great thing to have this podcast, taking the conversation about the Good Employment Charter out, getting more people involved. So well done to you and the team for launching it.
Thanks, Andy. You've had a long career in British politics. You served in Gordon Brown's cabinet as Chief Secretary to the Treasury, but also as Culture Secretary and Health Secretary through to 2010. You served as Shadow Home Secretary from 2015 to 16, and of course were the MP for Lee from 2001 to 2017. I'm really looking forward to chatting to you today about the challenges ahead and how the Good Work agenda can help drive forward your vision for Greater Manchester. However, before we get into the issues of the day, Andy, I'd like to start where we'll begin with all our guests in this series, with a personal perspective and reflection on work and employment. So before your political career, can you tell us where it all started for you? What was your very first job, perhaps even as far back as a Saturday job or a holiday job?
Well, I think when you read out my CV there, Ian, people would be thinking, my goodness, he's never had a real job, has he? With all of those political roles that I've done. But I did in the past have a real job. There was a lot of Saturday jobs and bar jobs, that kind of thing. But the one, I guess, that was the sort of first meaningful job, Ian, was my role as an unpaid reporter on the Middleton Guardian. That was my first job out of university. And I guess you can tell by what I've just said there with unpaid reporter, it took me into the realms of not the best employment straight away. And I certainly remember that experience quite vividly, actually.
So tell us a bit more about that, Andy. What was your day like? What were your bosses like? Did that give you any insight into what good employment might look like?
Well, newspapers are a tough environment anyway, Ian. And I'd just come from studying English at Cambridge, so I was full of all highfalutin phrases. And the great thing about that job was, it really brought me down to earth. And I learned there that writing simply and clearly is a greater skill actually than flowering it up for a Cambridge essay. So I learnt a lot, and actually I wouldn't swap it, but it was a very difficult environment, and the media always has been, hasn't it, where organisations are able to trade on young people's desperation to get a break in the media, to not pay them very well, if at all, or also not necessarily to treat them properly. And I was certainly the office whipping boy. If something went wrong, it was I was the one who got the flack. And to cut a long story short, I eventually walked out of that job, Ian. So I learnt a lot in a very short space of time.
Oh, that's interesting. I caught on the fact that it was an unpaid role to start with, Andy. Never mind a real living wage. And I've always been really strong on this point, Ian, as a result of this experience. When I left university, I saw friends of mine walk into unpaid internships at places like the Guardian and the Times, and because they had parents with connections who could afford to keep them in those roles. So I didn't have the connections, but nor did I have the money to sustain myself unpaid, travelling to and from Lee to Middleton every day. So in the end, although I walked out because of the way I was treated, I couldn't really sustain it anyway. And I've always called very strongly for paid internships for young people, because the lack of them means that it's people of a certain social class who then populate the media and the legal profession and financial services, because obviously they can
afford to do an unpaid internship or an unpaid position. So I've long had very strong feelings about that. And as mayor, I've tried to bring through work shadowing opportunities for young people that are properly supported.
Yeah, and there's a whole range of initiatives across GM that, like the GM Bridge, that expose people to work and build those relationships, which are fantastic. Andy, so look, that gave you maybe a flavour of what an unfair workplace could feel like, and maybe drive some of your feelings towards a more equitable workplace. But was that experience formative in thinking about work fairness and maybe your notion of working in public service at that stage, and then leading on to political aspirations? How did that work?
Yeah, it was. So this was the early 90s, Ian. It was, I say, I wouldn't swap it. It was a good experience, but I did get a kind of strong sense of the injustice of working in an environment where, people are kind of trading on your desperation to get on in life. And, it's something that did stay with me, and then informed some of the political campaigns I kind of ran in later life. I used to have a phrase about kids without connections, how much harder it is for young people who don't have parents on the dinner party circuit and all of that, able to open doors for them. That's still a fact in this country, isn't it? Social mobility is still a bit of a myth at times for a lot of people, just because they never get through the door in the first place to be able to prove themselves. So I do feel that very, very strongly indeed, and it has always kind of formed my kind of political responses. I remember something when Labour was in government in the education maintenance allowance. I was a really big supporter of it because it was a little grant that was given to 16, 17-year-olds to follow their dream after secondary school, to go to the college of their choice and to support them to aim high. And when it was taken away, it was the cruelest of cuts, actually, I always felt. So the free bus pass for 16 to 18s that I've brought through as mayor is very much intended to replace that. It's about saying to young people at that age, there shouldn't be any barrier in your way of you aiming high and going to follow the thing that you most want to do. And in a simple way, the R-Pass is intended to send that message to our amazingly talented teenagers across Greater Manchester.
Andy, I can't identify more strongly with what you just said. I'm a little bit older than you, and when I grew up in Scotland, and I grew up, my dad died when I was 10, so I grew up with with just my mum and my sister, but there was no way I would have got to university had it not been for an education grant at that stage. So that was the biggest element of social mobility that facilitated my move to from a working class family into the first person ever to go to university. So it's that sort of intervention that really made a difference personally, and I know it makes a difference across Greater Manchester now. Good employment conditions have always been at the heart of health and well-being. Go back to our industrial ages, but the pandemic has revealed just how important it is for the resilience of our communities going forward. Over the last year, Andy, it is now a year, what lessons have you taken from the past 12 months?
I think there's a very simple one, Ian, that's staring us all in the face, and that's the nature of people's work affects their health, whether they will have good health. And one of the things that the pandemic has done, I think, has maybe shocked us out of our complacency when it comes to the nature and quality of people's work, because clearly some people are very exposed to ill health because of their work, and I hope the pandemic will bring a new focus on that issue. I think people have lived parallel lives over the last 12 months. There have been some people zooming away at home and finding the whole stay-at-home thing pretty all right, actually, and there's others who've been out at work all year, have never not been out at work, in a situation where their pay and their contract of employment doesn't support them to take time off work should they need to or be asked to do so by the contact tracers. It's very clear to me that this has been a very different experience depending on where people live and what job they do. And I would also raise the issue about workplace safety. It's disappointing to me that the Health and Safety Executive have only classified COVID-19 as a significant workplace concern rather than a serious workplace concern. So I think some people have been out at work in low-paid, insecure jobs in workplaces that were not entirely safe. And I think that is revealed in the figures for infection. If you look around the country, you can see the communities where more people are in that kind of work. You can see the communities where that is the case, and you can see that reflected in the infection rates.
And moving forward, Andy, the notion of Build Back Better, and we're seeing a little bit of light at the end of the tunnel, perhaps. How do you see good work playing out as we move forward and start reopening the economy again?
I think we've got to change the conversation, and I think that's why I said at the start I really welcome this podcast, Ian, and this chance to talk about these issues in depth. How do I see it playing out? We've got to make the moral case for good work in terms of allowing every one of our fellow citizens to have good health and a good life, and that, you know, their work shouldn't damage that. But also the business case. It can't be good for companies, can it, to have people in work who really should be off ill. It just cannot make sense. And yet we've kind of adopted a very short-term view of these things, where we kind of hammer down people's terms and conditions, we strip away their security. In the end, I don't think that builds a productive organisation or a productive business. Surely it's the case that the more supported and rewarded people feel, the more they will give back to the organisation, the greater value that they will create. And we've got to convince people of the business case for good work. We have members of the Greater Manchester Good Employment Charter who can point to the evidence that treating people well at work has actually improved their bottom line. And I think that's as much where the conversation needs to go, Ian, after the pandemic, as well as saying, well, look, a lot of people have been exposed to illness because of the lack of protection afforded to them by their work. So I hope there is a renewed focus on all of these things, and a move away from the fairly toxic 0 hours culture that we've allowed to grow in this country.
Yeah, absolutely, Andy. And I think you're right in terms of some of the exemplars we can point to who recognise the productivity benefits of good employment in their organisations, but also the sense of the market now looking at only dealing with organisations who look after the staff, who look after the environment, who have a wider social responsibility. And I think that will start to change some of the perception around these agendas. We're in the midst of developing a real living wage region, Andy, and in the light of last week's 1% offer to the NHS. And perhaps, certainly some commentators are saying, any job is a good job moving forward. So how do we move that debate on, particularly in the vulnerable kind of foundational economies like hospitality, retail, cleaners, security staff, etc.? They're going to be a tough nut to crack, aren't they?
They are, and I think you've identified a real risk, Ian, in that there will be those saying we just need jobs of any kind, and rather than build back better, there's a real risk of building back worse, isn't there? Because the kind of urgency around the jobs crisis might mean the standards lowered. So that is a risk that needs to be watched against. I think the issue of nurses' pay sets a really, to me, sets the wrong tone coming out of all of this. The NHS is by no means out of the woods. The NHS has got a mountain in front of it, actually, because once it's dealt with the pandemic, there's all of the things that have been not done during the pandemic that have been stored up, the ill health that will come back at the NHS in a number of different ways. So, to sort of demoralise the workforce now is not a wise move, in my view, particularly when employers have budgeted for a 2% increase. Just on that level, it just seems totally wrong. But I think we need to make the argument for good work coming out of this. And it's an argument about resilience, isn't it? People's resilience, community resilience. If, God forbid, we were to face another pandemic in the next decade or so, which is, I'm afraid, possible. So I just think we need to have do a bit of soul searching, I think, before we rush ahead with just sort of kickstarting whatever we can do. We've got an inequalities commission running in Greater Manchester, and I will kind of look at its findings really carefully. We need to understand how Britain has ended up with a number of deaths that we have, which is higher than other comparable countries. And I think the answers as to why that has happened are, for too many people, the poor quality of their work, and combined with that, the poor nature of housing. Those are fundamentals that are affecting not just the strength of our society, but also the strength of our economy. Ian, how long have we talked in this country about a productivity problem? I think that issue of low productivity in parts of British industry is a result of this race to the bottom culture that we often have. We need to think longer term, building good, strong, productive workplaces where employees feel properly supported. In the end, that will be in the best interests of UK PLC.
Again, Andy, really agree with your sentiments there, and certainly that's where the Charter is pointing towards moving forward. We want to engage with as many businesses and employers in the foundational economies to take them on that journey, to show them the productivity benefits. We are, later in this series, interviewing Kate Pickett, the chair of the Inequalities Commission, and I'm sure what she will share will be really valuable in taking forward some of those agendas, Andy. Liverpool City Region recently launched their Fair Employment Charter, and we know that other areas in the north are looking at similar initiatives. How do you think these initiatives can be working together, and how should they be working together, Andy?
Well, I think it's important that there is a degree of consistency between them, because otherwise devolution will create such a patchwork of initiatives, Ian, that businesses will say, well, this is all too confusing. We're being asked to do one thing in Manchester, something different in Liverpool, something else in Leeds. So I think it is incumbent on myself and the Mayor of the Liverpool City Region, Steve Rotherham, and the new Mayor in West Yorkshire, about to be elected in May, to work together to make sure we create, from the bottom up, a consistency across the M62 corridor. But that is what's happening. So the Fair Employment Charter in Merseyside very much mirrors the Greater Manchester Good Employment Charter. And I think this is kind of exciting, really, Ian, isn't it? That we're trying to change things here from the bottom up rather than from the top down in legislation from Westminster, in the way that we've always looked for change to happen. This is a serious attempt to say, can we make change happen differently in the country through a more devolved bottom-up approach? Can we kind of take people with us on a journey and work with enlightened employers who see the value of this and want the same? So, I look back on my first term and I'm proud of the effort that's gone into the Greater Manchester Good Employment Charter. When I first came up with the idea, I couldn't believe that it would be this strongly based and such a powerful set of proposals, to be honest, that has broad support from business and trade unions. You've built it in a really inclusive way, Ian, and I think it's stronger for that. And it's ready now, I think, to provide an answer to the world we're about to go into. And And I really hope that people will start buying into this, and we can show that devolution in England, which is different from the devolution in Scotland and Wales, which is still quite top-down devolution, actually. What we're doing here is something different, isn't it? Kind of using the power of the combined authority in the city region to send a message out to the world about Greater Manchester and what it's all about. As the home of the trade union movement, I think it is absolutely right that we should be leading the way on good quality 21st century work. And I think it says to me something positive, not just about how we treat people here, but also to potential investors in Greater Manchester. It says that we're a place that cares about standards, cares about people. And I think that makes us attractive, I hope, as a place where people want to come, where people want to invest. So we've done the groundwork, Ian, and you and your team have done a fantastic job. We're really grateful to the Greater Manchester Chamber of Commerce, the North West TUC, others who've bought into this process. But the groundwork is now hopefully about to pay some dividends, isn't it, as we do turn our attention to the recovery.
We're hugely excited, Andy, about the charter, and particularly the movement that started to be created across the M62 corridor. You know, recognising that political geography doesn't always recognise economic geography, and that we've got employers right across the north that will want to engage in this agenda. So yeah, we're excited about working with our colleagues in Leeds and Liverpool on this. Andy, you know, business leaders and organisational leaders have really supported their employees over the last 12 months, but recently they've started to hold their hands up and go, oh, I need help too. My mental health and well-being perhaps isn't what it should be. Now, politics is a vocation, and many of the normal good employment rules don't seem to apply. You do long hours, you've got no formal support mechanisms, no terms and conditions, I guess. So how do you look after yourself to relax and look after your own health and well-being? Any tips you could share?
Well, you certainly know what you sign up for when you go into politics, Ian. So I wouldn't want to seek sympathy, but everything you describe is true. It is a tough environment at times, and yeah, I've learned over the years to take the good bits in not getting carried away and not get too down when the bad things happen. You've just got to try and keep a steady course and focus on what you're trying to do. That's what the tip I would say, and this applies to anybody in any walk of life or any field of business. If you know what you're trying to do, the difference you're trying to make, just keep focused on that, because that should be the thing that motivates and inspires you to keep going. And if it's a meaningful change that you're trying to bring about, then I think you end up being able to sort of take the bumps and the knocks along the way. In terms of a more immediate coping mechanism, it is running, I have to say. I've always been a bit of a runner, but I've definitely been getting the K's in over this lockdown. And the thing I think about physical activity, and maybe everyone's had this experience to a degree over the last year, Ian, it does help you cope, be it walking, cycling or running. We often solve physical activity in this country on the benefits to physical health. That later down the line you'd be less likely to have a heart attack or diabetes, or it may help you control your weight or something like that. I think we need to sell it more on the mental health benefits. Physical activity allows you to instantly feel better. It's like an instant hit, isn't it? You immediately are better able to face the day if you've gone out and done something before you start work. And I kind of I'm so seized of the truth of that. And I just, will really want to work with our colleagues at GM Moving to sort of, get that over to people. It helps you cope. It builds that bit of resilience. It gives you a lift. It lifts your mood. It reduces stress. And a lot of the work we're doing in Greater Manchester around the B network and investing in better walking and cycling infrastructure is very much linked to this idea of a more active city region. I think that is a part of building that health resilience within our communities, and mental health resilience too.
We've got a great working relationship with Greatest Sport, Andy, and we're promoting their toolkits for workplaces all the time, and the whole GM Moving initiative is something that we'll promote heavily with employers, especially through these times as people are struggling at home. They do need to get out, and I know myself, I've discovered walkways and pathways I didn't know existed in the last year. Just as trying to do exactly what you say, lift your mood with a walk in the morning. Andy, thank you so much. Really insightful. Finally, if you were to speak directly to GM employers, is there one thing you would ask them to consider doing to help us build back better?
It's a simple ask, Ian. It's join the conversation about the Greater Manchester Good Employment Charter. Look into it. Open your mind to how it might improve your organisation by making it a better place to work, a happier place to work, a more productive place. I think come with us on the journey, because what we're building here is a movement. The more people that join, the stronger it will get. We're a city region, I think, that is entrepreneurial. People here are very inventive, and always have been, to be honest. It's something that sets Greater Manchester apart from other places. It is an entrepreneurial place, but it combines that entrepreneurialism with a conscience and the need to look after everybody, and to give back, and I just think it's such a powerful kind of set of values really that Greater Manchester has. Making economic progress alongside social progress. I think for me that's the way the world should be. So it's what we're all about, and in the end, the more businesses that come on this journey with us, I think in the end we will send out a message about the Greater Manchester economy that will be attractive to the youngest talents in the country. Younger people, I think, are more conscious of these issues now. They won't put up with poor or discriminatory employment. They will want to work in a city that embodies the right values when it comes to these things. So if we're going to attract the best talent here, we all need to do this together. And I'd just ask all Greater Manchester-based employers to think about your own journey to becoming an accredited Greater Manchester Good Employer.
Andy, huge thanks again for your time. Your continued support and championing of the Charter is hugely appreciated. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Ian.
Thanks for listening. We'd love it if you could subscribe, rate, and leave us a review. Be sure to follow us on Twitter at GoodEmpCharter and LinkedIn to stay up to date with all the latest Charter news. See you next time.